Well, let's go to some of our callers, texters, tweeters, Xers. What have you got, Esther?
So Clyde says the UK has become unrecognisable these days. It's tragic. And Jake also said, I'd love to hear the reaction of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. I'm sure he'd shoehorn the far right into it somewhere whilst blaming Brexit. So,
yeah, no, I don't doubt it. Claire?
You've got Mark says, yes, most definitely London has become a no-go zone for Jews and UK citizens alike if you don't support Palestine. And then somebody, who was it? There's Paul, who very, very funny. I like this one, who said, then the UK's counter-terrorism czar admits he's not doing his job.
Which is a good point.
An interesting point.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
I think Paul is probably, you know, a little bit bang on the money on that.
I wonder what he is expected to do. Let's just go to that point about the Mayor of London, because this is really striking to me. I've got a long memory and a long voting record of voting no to things that I think are going to make life in Britain worse. And I remember 25 years ago, we had a vote in London as to whether or not we wanted a London mayor. Most people don't remember this. But I voted no, that we didn't. I'm told since that apparently there's lots of things the mayor can do that's made things better. Building regulations, apparently it's much easier to do. But my ancient insight, my ancient wisdom on this was as follows, that the more levels of government you have, the more people can avoid responsibility for anything. Yeah. And I would say, and one of your reaction is, I'd say that applies nowhere more than with the police. Policing powers in this country, everybody is saying that the Metropolitan Police have been getting these protests wrong, that from the beginning they've been policing them badly. They've allowed, as we saw, certainly in the first weeks, unbelievable things to be said, chanted and raised on the streets of London. But who is actually responsible for the police?
But I think that's you've touched on the second point as well. So more levels of government obviously makes things more inefficient and clunky, but also who's filling those gaps and those new levels that you've created. And it's usually people with very limited experience on the job. So you now have people being ushered into senior levels in the police force that don't actually have any on-the-ground experience. They've have a degree from a university that says they can police in theory, but in practice it's completely different. And so you have all these kind of bureaucrats being shoehorned in because they have a sexy degree from an unknown former polytechnic university.
Did you say a sexy degree?
Well, sexy, yeah, sexy. Yeah. Oh, I have an MA and this and that. And then they get into the role, they have no practical experience. And they have all this debt and they're overpaid more than people with practical experience. Yeah. And so it's a kind of a double whammy. You have these unnecessary positions being filled by people with no experience. That's the problem.
Do you agree?
And I think the police itself needs to be one entity and controlled by a body. And I think you're right. Nobody takes ultimate responsibility. If you look at the Metropolitan Police, you have the Mayor of London, you have police and crime commissioners, and then notionally the Home Office.
Right.
So notionally, who are in charge of policing strategy.
And who of those, because, you know, we hear of a Home Secretary calling in the Mayor calling in the heads of police. Yeah. Who actually is responsible for the Metropolitan Police?
Well, no one. It's a giant clunking mess.
You have, I mean, the Mayor of London acts as the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police. So, therefore, Sadiq Khan, current London Mayor, would be the one to be held responsible.
But Sadiq Khan keeps saying that it's not his responsibility.
And there's your issue.
Knowledge of policing.
And there is your issue, because you also have the Home Secretary, who will be responsible in part for parts of policing, and the Chief Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, as the head honcho of the Metropolitan Police, ultimately should land on his shoulders. So you get into this really weird situation where you've got people in charge of bits of it and nobody wants to take responsibility for the entirety.
And the people in charge of the bits of it have no experience with policing. Sadiq Khan doesn't know anything about policing, and neither does the Home Secretary. So that's what you have, these layers of unnecessary government, and then they're being filled by people with no experience. And this is the problem.
And you see that with the introduction of the Police and Crime Commissioner position, which I thought was a ridiculous idea when it came out.
There's another layer.
It is another layer, and it is people with absolutely pretty much zero responsibility of policing.
And no vision, because now we see community policing has all been gutted. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's the result of
Well, but
police and crime
result,
commissioners.
because
I mean,
these people don't
that
know
is
what they're
government
doing.
funding. No, they don't know what they're doing. But I think the problem is funding on that respect. But no, they don't understand the needs of policing. They've never been a serving police officer, and they don't understand what the community needs.
But I tell you, one thing that absolutely mystifies me about the Metropolitan Police in particular is we've had these protests now for months.
Yep.
And by the way, this isn't the same in other countries. I mean, whatever you think about the right to protest and all that, the British public do believe in the right to protest. There's no doubt. All the polls show, you know, very, very wide-ranging support for this. We recognise it as we were talking about earlier, a fundamental British right. However, other countries don't allow this. France, which is not an uncivilized country, the president banned marches from the beginning. He said, no, this is not, the streets of Paris are not to be shut down because of protests about a war in the Middle East. So other countries have managed that, but other than, I mean, aside from actually shutting down the protests, which I say is sort of not a very British thing to do, the thing that amazes me is that we see the Metropolitan Police week after week sometimes being taunted by protesters, very often being dealt with in a threatening manner by protesters. We see people who have undoubtedly broken the 2006 Terrorism Act by glorifying terror. And the police stand around and they seem to sort of take it. Now, whenever I speak to the police about this, I get told, well, our advice is to hold back. But here's the thing I don't understand. And it's true that they hold back, and sometimes they go in and arrest people in the early hours of the morning, and they forget, of course, that the British public and the public around the world do not see those early morning house raids. They do see people on our streets, in front of Westminster Abbey, in front of the Cenotaph, defacing our public monuments and much more. But the thing that amazes me is this. A few years ago, during COVID, during lockdowns, the Metropolitan Police acted like a crack squad against the British public. And some of us also remember that when there was a candlelit vigil for Sarah Everard in London, the police went in all batons blazing. I said at the beginning of these protests, when the police seemed to have such trouble working out that if somebody was calling out jihad on the streets of London, they might be a wrong 'un. I said what those big bearded maniacs shouting jihad on the streets of London should have done in order to get arrested by the police was to have a candlelit vigil for a murdered woman.
Exactly.
But anyway, Esther, what do you think?
Well, I think one of the things is the numbers are not on the Metropolitan Police's side. So obviously the numbers of the Palestinian protesters dwarf that of any vigil, any BLM protest. So the police can't throw their weight about there. But I actually think there's just been a reluctance to actually police the protest as opposed to kind of managing and ushering them on. I absolutely believe in the right to protest. I think any British person does and should. But you have to manage it, because in the same way that we don't and we shouldn't tolerate, for instance, Just Stop Oil protesters gluing themselves to the M25 or defacing public monuments and all of that, we shouldn't tolerate this either. If you know that something like this, which is very incendiary, is going to draw huge crowds, you isolate them. You say, this is your space to do what you want. In this space, you can do whatever you want. We'll be around if anyone needs help. There must be a number limit, because we cannot have such a large space that would accommodate people in their millions. That's ludicrous, and we don't have the resources for that. Look at how much this is costing.
I know, but I think if they'd done it right from the start, if they had removed offensive banners, if they had removed people who were chanting from the river to the sea, which is offensive, and projecting things onto the House of Commons, if they'd done that right from the start and said, we aren't going to tolerate any of this, you are allowed to protest, you have the right to protest, anything that is supporting a prescribed organisation, anything that is going to be offensive and is going to cause alarm, it has to be stopped. They have the laws there to do it. It's not as if that you need any more legislation. You don't. You've got it. The police just need to actually do their job. And if they'd done it right from the start, we wouldn't be in this mess now.